Hello and welcome back to another video as we continue to explore the story. Kind of looks like that. The story is a condensed Bible narrative book um, that was put together by a guy named Randy Frazee, and I'm producing these videos every week as a companion to a study that we are doing in my congregation. My name is Scott Dalen, ELCA pastor in Southwest Iowa. And I told you already why I make these videos. This particular week, in our study of the story, we looked at chapter 7 entitled The Battle Begins. This particular week, or within this particular chapter, we talked about Joshua, who succeeded Moses as the leader of the Israelite people as they were crossing from their wilderness wanderings, which we looked at in last week's video and last week's study, into actually entering into the promised land and beginning to take possession of the land in that period of their history. Now, just a little bit of background within the extended narrative of what's been going on. The first 5 books of the Bible are called the Pentateuch: Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Leviticus. One a little out of order there, but that's what they are. And they really highlight that early history of both the creation of the world, where we start in Genesis, and then also seeing God's covenant with Abraham, all the way through quite a few centuries worth of action and history, through going into Egypt and multiplying into a great nation, descendants all from Abraham, and then the Exodus out of Egypt, and all of that stuff with Moses, and then finally entering into the desert and wandering for 40 years until that generation had all died off. And now, with the death of Moses, Joshua is the new leader and is going to lead the people across the Jordan River into the promised land to begin to take that. Now, that's the focal point of this particular chapter. Now, this particular chapter also covers all of the book of Joshua, which is the 6th book of the Old Testament, and really is a transition from that early history that I already mentioned into, and then transferring into what happens now as the nation comes into and is into the promised land. Now, following the book of Joshua comes the book of Judges, and that we start to see the cyclic history of God raises up a judge to lead the people. They deliver the people from whoever their enemies are at that particular point, lead the people in following God until that particular judge dies, and then they kind of go on this crazy cycle over and over again, something that we've seen already with the Israelite people in our past history. But that's coming, that will be in our next video as we dive into Judges, into that part of their history. So this one is particularly Joshua, which really counts the history of as they came in. Now, the book opens up. There's kind of 4 different sections to this particular chapter. First, we talked about Joshua's pep talk that comes both from God, and then also Joshua then kind of gives the pep talk to the people, and that's the first part. And then we talk about the Battle of Jericho. That's kind of their first real battle as they've entered into the Promised Land. The first stronghold that the people take. Then we kind of look at subduing the rest of the land. And finally, Joshua's closing address. The interesting thing about the book of Joshua is the first half talks about the conquest of the area. And then a part that's skipped over in the story that's not really talked about is as the land is divided up between the 12 different tribes of Israel, and they all kind of take their portion and live among one another. That's skipped over, as I mentioned. And then we kind of go into Joshua's farewell address. Now, in a lot of ways, this mirrors the end of Deuteronomy, as Moses had been leading the people, and then Moses is about to die, and he gives this big, long farewell address and essentially tells the people, you need to make a choice. Are you going to follow the Lord, who has done all of this for us? And he recounts the story of everything that's gone on. Are you going to choose God? Are you going to choose life? Or are you going to choose the path of destruction? Joshua ends up doing pretty much the same thing. He after quite a few years, it's approximately 30 to 40 years after the death of Moses, is when we're coming to the end of Joshua. They've taken over the land, they've settled in the land, and Joshua basically tells them, like, hey, continue to follow God. My house, we're going to follow the Lord. And you need to make a choice to do the same. So that's kind of the overarching history of what's going on with the book of Joshua. Within our conversation last night in our group, we talked quite a bit about Joshua's leadership and the arc of what's gone on with him. Keep in mind that Joshua was one of the two spies 40 years previously who had said, yes, let's go take the people, God, or let's go take the land. God is with us. God will deliver us. And if you remember from our last video, the previous of the 12, there was Joshua, there was Caleb, and then the other 10 all said, no, we can't. And then they spread false reports of what was going on to dissuade the people, and that's why they wandered in the desert for 40 years. Well, Joshua was one of the two that said, yeah, let's go take it. So that's his early history. He's also been the assistant to Moses, so he's been kind of groomed for this leadership role throughout his lifetime, really. And yet now, as it's time to go in, it seems that Joshua has become a little bit more timid. There's a definite strong theme throughout this entire chapter, but particularly at the beginning, as Joshua's talking with God. God tells him, be strong and courageous, and do not be afraid. We hear that over and over and over again, and then eventually Joshua starts saying that to the people as well. So we talked quite a bit about, well, what's gone on for Joshua that he's kind of become, he's not so much of a go-getter anymore. Is it just the regular flow of life that as we get a little older, we tend to get a little bit more reserved, we get a little bit more conservative, we get a little more, and I'm not talking politically, I'm just talking, naturally. Is that what's going on? Is as he's gotten older, is it now the mantle of leadership that weighs heavily upon him? And it could be a lot of this. It could also just be that God knew that the people were going to need to hear this. And so that's why he pounded it into Joshua so much. We also talked a little bit about why did Joshua become the leader. Now, as mentioned, he's been Moses' assistant, so he's been around leadership throughout his lifetime. But clearly, with what we see in the conquest of so many different armies and kingdoms or whatever within the Promised Land, Joshua is a great military leader. He must be. And yes, God is with the Israelites most of the time. We do hear of a couple, at least one example here in the story, and there's another one as well, of when God was not with the people because they didn't listen to him, and so those battles didn't go quite so well. We talked about that some too. That as Joshua and the Israelites go and take the Promised Land, it's a long period of time. It's about 30 years that it takes them to kind of spread themselves through the Promised Land and take it. Lots of battles, lots of fighting. And we talked about the reality of this situation, that they were at war and there were casualties. And that we think is why the narrative includes these battles that they lost as a reminder that there is cost to what they're doing, that people died in this. This is warfare. It was not just, hey, let's go in and we'll take this one city and then we'll move to the next city and then we'll move to the next city. And it wasn't just a period of a few weeks to take this land. It was years, literally years. And there was a lot of cultural mixing with the people that were there as they continued to spread through the land. And we'll continue to see that too, that this was no simple task. It was long and drawn out and came at great cost to the people. We talked some at great length also about the Battle of Jericho and the role of Rahab the prostitute in that. Before they actually cross the Jordan, Joshua sends two spies, and we don't know who they are. They go into Jericho. That's a fortified city. It's their first target. And they scout out the land. Well, the king knows that they're there, the king of Jericho, and is searching for them to kill them. And yet somehow they encounter Rahab, and we don't know why. We don't know if it's a chance encounter. We don't know if God led Rahab to them. We don't know if God led them to Rahab, or if they happen to be at her house for Not quite so nice reasons, considering her day job. But regardless, they interact, and she tells them, all the people are afraid of you because of what your God has done. We recognize that your God must be the greatest God. So she says, if I protect you, will you protect me and my family when you invade? And they make this deal, and yes, they will protect her. And so, and that is honored when they take Jericho, which is a really random, weird situation how they do it, of walk around once a day for 6 days, and on the seventh day walk around it six times and then shout at it and the walls will fall down. That's exactly what happened. Rahab and her family are saved. Everyone else is killed, destroyed utterly, and yet Rahab comes among the people and lives among them. Is kind of one of the first examples of a foreigner being accepted into the community of the Israelites and honored in that way. So we talked quite a bit about that, about what was her motivation, what caused that, the reputation of God, the reputation of the Israelites, so on and so forth. That was quite a bit of discussion as well. A big tripping point for us in our discussion this time around was the utter destruction that God orders the people to do of so many of these different tribes, these different cultures that they encounter in their conquest of the land, and it's very hard to accept. One commentary that I read on this discusses the importance of Moses' closing words when he told the people, as you take this land, it is not because of any righteousness that you have achieved, it is because of the wickedness of the people that are there. And there it speaks of the cultures there for whatever reason, and we don't necessarily know what it is, but these cultures are so wicked in the eyes of the Lord, so sinful, whatever we want to say it, that God literally wipes them off the earth through the conquest of the Israelite people and the battles that they go through. So a lot of these early battles, they leave no one alive. They destroy the cities. They destroy the livestock. I mean, they destroy everything. They take no spoils. They destroy everything to blot it out. Eventually that changes as time passes, and they spread throughout more of the land. They take the cities and then they reside in the cities, and so we see that. But in short, that's kind of what's been going on within this particular chapter. It's a chapter of transition from the early history and early wanderings and the growth of the nation into becoming established within the promised land that was part of the covenant promised to Abraham clear back in Genesis. So we see Joshua as a central figure this time around of leadership, but then moving forward, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have a transfer of that. There won't be a central leader now for quite a while, as the history continues. But as we get into the book of Judges, which will be in the next chapter, and history goes by, then we see leadership style of that, which will eventually lead to the kings. But that's a little farther down the road too. If you have any questions or comments or thoughts, please share those either down in the comment section here or in the comments on Facebook, where this will also be posted. We can continue the conversation that way. If you have insights or thoughts or questions from your reading of the story or based on what you've seen, please share them and we'll keep it going. There will not be a video next week. We're going to take a week off, just an FYI. So if you're looking for these, look again in 2 weeks as we continue with our study of the story. Otherwise, God bless.